Welcome to My Psychedelic Roots, a podcast of conversations with people from a broad swath of lived experience to explore their psychedelic beginnings or roots. What led them to start using psychedelics, what those early experiences were like, and how those roots have impacted their life's unfolding. With apologies for my very rough voice this episode, my name is Amy Bartlett, and it is my hope that with these stories, generously shared by my guests, they offer perspective and insight into the lived reality of psychedelic experiencing. So whoever, wherever, or whenever you are, welcome. I'm glad you're here. In today's episode, I sit down with my good friend Joe Torre, who is currently serving as Lead Research Psychologist at the Center for Novel Therapeutics and Addiction Psychiatry at the University of Washington. He is a passionate psychedelic enthusiast, and as we will hear in this episode, his current role and research were a direct result of his first psychedelic experience with psilocybin, a connection which lives on as he co-leads psychedelic clinical research, including a 3-year Phase 2 psilocybin safety clinical trial funded by the state of Washington. He is also an instructor at the School of Psychology at University of Ottawa, where he teaches courses on psychedelic therapy and traditional uses of psychedelics. His primary research interests include novel psychedelic protocols for understudied indications such as schizophrenia, complex trauma, and personality disorders. He's also interested in the psychophenomenology of psychedelic experiences, the ways in which psychedelic experiences interface with the mystical, religious, and spiritual realms, as well as ethnobotany, mycology, indigenous traditions, medical anthropology, and the evolution of consciousness. This eclectic mix of research interests is grounded in what he has experienced in his own life, including being open to questioning everything he thought he knew, whether that was his academic pursuits in Buddhist studies, his friendships and relationships, or what he thought his life's path would be. In my experience of Joe as a friend and colleague, he is a lifelong learner and seeker of truth, and someone who is always open to changing his mind to pivot direction when better information becomes available. And this is very much reflected in how he came to psychedelics, and is an important part of what his surprising and somewhat challenging first experience showed him. And so, let's hear more about Joe's psychedelic roots. Welcome, Joe. It's so lovely to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking me to come.
I love it. So if there was one thing that you think people should know about you as we move into this conversation together, what would that thing be?
Yeah, so that would be that the psychedelic experience has been at the core of my being for the past 5 years, I would say, or maybe a little bit more. And that this first experience that we're going to talk about today is ultimately what led me to devote my entire life to the study of psychedelics, in the sense that, it's all consumptive. My work and my life in that sense are connected directly and intimately. That's kind of what I would say. It's just that this has just been so formative for me.
That's really beautiful. So it sounds like you've had some really profound connections to the psychedelic experience and to the psychedelic world. I'm curious what led you to that deep connection. And so I wonder if we could trace a thread from your childhood to your first psychedelic experience, where might that thread begin for you?
Such a beautiful question. And of course, you sent me these questions beforehand, so I had a little bit of time to meditate on them. And this was one that really kind of shocked me because it's a memory that I've forgotten. But then this kind of allowed me to remember my childhood a little bit. And it brought me all the way back to, oh, I must have been in, second or third grade or something like this. And I remember playing on the playground with my friends, and they all wanted to pretend to be different animals, but I wanted to pretend to be a tree. And there was always this deep curiosity about the natural world, because then I also like collected rocks as a kid, collected insects. I was your typical nerd. I was a total nerdy kid, and I was honestly bullied in a lot of ways for it. But in the end, I'm glad that's who I was and who I am today. I am the way I am because of that. That part of my personality, that deep connection to the natural world. And so, yeah, I think that I can follow this thread from my childhood about being so interested in plants and in particular, and then basically in my adolescent years, I also have always had a very strong interest in different cultures. And I had a student stay with me from South Korea when I was in middle school, and then after that, I just was forever kind of fascinated with other cultures. And then so these two kind of interests converged really in my late adolescence, I guess, when I started listening to like Alan Watts and Terence McKenna. And then eventually, at some point, that led me to take some psychedelics, and then it all kind of evolved from there.
I love that little Joe and that playfulness with nature, wanting to be nature. I mean, ultimately, we are as human beings, part of nature, but really feeling that deeply as a
Mm-hmm.
child. What was your relationship to wonder, to spirituality, or altered states of consciousness in your childhood? Or did you have a relationship to spirituality or wonder? Was that part of how you grew up?
Yeah, I mean, spirituality when I was a child, I wouldn't say so, but awe and wonder, like, yeah, I was always imagining different fantasies and really living them out. They weren't like metaphors, I was actually, living as a knight or as a, whatever. Yeah, I can vaguely remember how childlike wonder what that felt like.
Such a vivid imagination, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah.
And did you grow up in an environment where psychedelics were discussed either
No.
positively or negatively? What was your perception of them before you moved into teenagehood?
Yeah, I mean, I had only heard one thing once, was that LSD, if you take it 5 times, it then becomes stored in your spine, and then you can randomly have a flashback at any moment for the rest of your life. That was the only thing I ever heard about psychedelics until I stumbled upon Terence McKenna.
And so it sounds like those early readings of Alan Watts, Terence McKenna, they sort of inspired you to
Hmm.
learn about these substances. Did people around you, your friends, your family, or society in general, did anybody react to your curiosity about psychedelics, or was that a very private inquiry?
I mean, no one, I hadn't really had anyone in my circle who was like a psychonaut or someone who took psychedelics intentionally or anything like that. I really didn't meet anyone like that until graduate school. So that's when I first actually started meeting people, was at Harvard. Before that, I had not really ever encountered even a chance to do psychedelics, really.
Hmm. And so those early readings, what about Alan Watts, Terence McKenna, what about these thinkers inspired you?
Yeah, I just was always drawn to Terrence's deep reverence for the natural world. And he spoke a lot about respecting the mushroom, and that mushroom guru, and how it's kind of like this cosmic joke that, to see the secrets of the universe, you need to eat a tiny mushroom growing out of a piece of poop, and it got me really, really curious. Like the way he spoke about it was that, it's a gentle force. It's not gonna, if your intentions are pure, it will treat you right, these kinds of things. And it really got me thinking, like, and then meeting entities and these kinds of things. It was just incredible, to literally unbelievable. And then you're like fascinated by it. Yeah. And then someone, just the right place, the right time, someone got me some mushrooms, and I was able to see everything that I'd, heard Terrence talk about. I'd got to experience it firsthand,
Yeah. I'm curious, Joe. I know that you studied Buddhism at university. I'm curious, what came first? Your reading about the mushrooms or your study of Buddhism? How did they
Yeah.
work together?
Well, I went to do my master's in Buddhism. So the Buddhism definitely preceded the psychedelic.
So it came afterwards.
The psychedelics came afterwards, which is very interesting because I want to, say that if I want to talk for a moment about the content of that first experience, because it was a watershed moment. I think that no two trips are the same, but there also is really no trip like your first trip, like your first real trip.
Mm-hmm.
And well, yeah, one of the many things, I could talk for days about that first experience, but one of the many things that was revealed to me was that I was kind of wasting my life a little bit, because I had been studying Buddhism in a academic sense. So once walking down the street in Cambridge, I ran into a Tibetan Lama, Tibetan monk who runs one of the monasteries in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I told him, I started talking with him, and I told him that I was studying Buddhism at Harvard. And he said, "Oh, well, that's, they don't study the real Buddhism. They study, history and stuff like that. But we, in the monastery, in the temple, we study the real Buddhism. We have faith. They don't have faith." And that was an interesting moment. I was like, oh, that sounded like, he was speaking uh, from a deep place of wisdom, that he knew something that I didn't know. And then it came out on my psychedelic trip as well that, I was studying Buddhism from a very academic point of view, and that I was basically pursuing like a PhD in Buddhist art history and like textual analysis of like old texts, but it wasn't really helping people. And, the mushroom said to me, they were like, one thing is, if you really want to help people, you could help people have experiences with the mushroom, with me. And in hindsight, it was probably a little bit of a moment where I could have done some better integration, but it was the first psychedelic experience I ever had, so I didn't really know what to make of it. So I took it at face value, and I thought, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. And I don't regret doing it, but that's kind of the moment that led me to pursue a PhD and start doing psychedelic research. And so that we could start giving it to people was also because of that first moment.
Wow. That is the genesis. Could I ask some questions about, how you moved into that first experience and how
Oh,
that sort of came to be?
well, yeah, it was a friend of mine who we no longer talk, unfortunately, but he had given me a very big bag, shall we say, of these dried, crusty, flaky, not very appetizing looking mushrooms. And I went home to my teeny tiny apartment one day in Boston. The person who was living with me at the time, we won't say who they were, was in one room and I was in the other room. And I told them, I said, hey, I'm going to be, doing this thing. So, I'm going to be taking these mushrooms and we'll see. I'm just going to stay in my office room, but, we'll see what happens. And said, okay. And
Before
then,
you start to talk about the experience, I'm curious, how did you decide that that was the day? Did you do any preparation or did you don't have
no,
to have, but I'm just curious
no,
why that moment? Was it just the
no, yeah.
epiphany?
There wasn't, I think it was just kind of a natural pause in my weekly flow of my schedule, my routine. There was like a day of rest beforehand or a half day, and then it was on a weekend or something like this when there was nothing to do and nothing that I had to do, I mean. And and then yeah, there was very little preparation. There was no preparation. And I kind of feel like I will be so curious on your podcast to hear about how they end up doing their first experience, because I have a feeling that most people stumble into it. And I certainly stumbled into it, and like door was blown off the hinges, kind of like boom. I had this massive experience in this office, and it was just I had never cried that much in my life or cried that hard. Or laughed that hard in my life or laughed that hard. Um, and there was this kind of bleeding of the two together. There was seeing beyond, seeing that life continues beyond death, essentially, and just having this noetic sense that this is truly how it happens. I I remember actually communing with the mushroom guru. And, I think that this was probably in part that like suggestibility piece from Terence McKenna, saying that this is what you're going to experience. Because I do think psychedelics are highly suggestible. Does that mean make it any less meaningful? I wouldn't say so. Like it felt very much like I met a mycelium entity that was 50 miles wide and 10 miles high. And I was just blown away. I like bowed down to this thing, and I was eternally grateful for its presence, even though it only spent about a minute with me and then left. And all of that unfolded. The mushroom showed me the universe I said, what are you showing me? And it said, I'm showing you the universe from the mushroom's perspective. And it was this non-thought. There was no language. It was just kind of like pure awareness. So it was overall this really, really, really profound experience. And there was a challenging ending though.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about the narrative arc. Yeah, it sounds like
Yeah,
it
so
was incredibly profound.
peak was incredibly profound. And then when I started plateauing at a certain point, I was bearing witness to like all of these universal truths, like, being revealed to me. And at some point, I felt it was necessary to communicate this to the person who was in my house. And I left the confines of my office and I went into the living room and I tried telling this person what I was experiencing and seeing. And they were like on their phone and kind of, no, totally brush me away like, oh, he's stoned or he's high out of his mind right now. He doesn't know what's going on. And this led me to kind of get louder. because I wasn't being listened to. So I started getting louder, and I started saying that the mushrooms demand to be listened to. The mushrooms demand to be listened to. And I started getting quite loud because I wasn't getting attention, or, the kind of. And then they looked at me, and I can't remember what the details, but all I know is that the next thing that I remember is that I was being slapped across the face. And so, not the best way for the first experience to go down. I mean, the odd thing is, though, that it didn't really affect me. That happened, but my state of euphoria remains totally unperturbed. I was still totally, it wasn't like I was spiraling into a black hole, negative, bad trip or something. It was, no, I kind of saw, wow, this person is so ignorant right now, or, and then I think it was towards the come down. And then I don't really remember what happened after that, but just that the following days, the afterglow was just as surreal as the trip itself. It was so incredible to be in that space for, I don't know, a few days, and then like a week or whatever. It was just a very transformative, fertile period, and it totally changed the trajectory of my life.
It's quite a contrast to have revealed secrets of the universe and to be visited by the mushroom entity and to feel so connected, and then to feel so perhaps rejected. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but the
Yes.
contrast in the sort of receiving and then trying to give and share and not being able to be met with that same flow, for lack of
Yeah.
a better word.
Yeah, there was definitely a mismatch energetically, and to say the least. And I I remember clearly it was kind of like this, again, this noetic quality where, wow, this person has no idea what I'm experiencing. They probably never will. And I was just like, quickly kind of went back to watching these miracles unfold within my mind. You know what I mean? It wasn't that's kind of how it played out. But it was kind of, it did freak me out at first. And I was like, wow, I don't like this person. And it was challenging that way, realizing that I didn't like this person. Now that I'm verbalizing it, I think that was a challenging moment, because I was living with this person and I realized I didn't like them. But it was also paramount to my well-being to learn that, because then I left that situation. So yeah, it was filled with all of the stuff, the beauty and the challenging, and it was profound. And I think very much of myself, the Joe before the mushroom and Joe after the mushroom.
Yeah. And so, if that first psychedelic experience were a chapter in your life story, what would the title of that chapter be for you?
Let me think here. Um, the title would be called Joe Meets the Mycelium Teacher.
And it sounds like that mycelium teacher has easy and hard things to teach.
It does. But, I believe that, like ayahuasca, the traditional wisdom keepers of ayahuasca say that it will never be too much for you. Like it knows what you need, and it gives you exactly that and not more. And I do feel that, the mushroom is very gentle in that regard. It has never given me too much that I couldn't handle it.
Mm. And so, what do you think your first psychedelic experience was trying to show you. It wasn't too much, it was just the right amount and just the right thing. Was there a particular question that psychedelics seemed to answer for you in that first
Mm.
experience?
Yeah, I think the main overarching, the meat of it was that I was headed down a path where it wasn't my life's calling to
Mm.
study Buddhist art and scriptures. It was my calling to help people to have this kind of experience
Mhm.
that felt much more aligned with me. And even though I had just stumbled upon it that day, it was crystal clear to me in the moment. And it still resonates with me with that degree of intensity. So that's the main message, was that it's my life's work.
Mhm. I'm curious if there's one thing you wish you had known before you had that first experience, what might that be? Or what advice would you give to someone who was going to be embarking on their first experience?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, there was so much I wish that I knew before, and so much I could say to people who are about to embark on this kind of experience. But I think it's all summed up quite nicely in the idea of set and setting, and just that, to a certain point, you can't prepare your mind for something that you don't know what it's going to be necessarily. So there is this issue with, particularly with the first time. But the setting, I mean, that's like low hanging fruit. That's just make sure you're in a safe, quiet, clean, private space, period. With someone or without someone, but that's the most important piece, I would say. And that was missing from mine, but I don't regret any of it. That's just how it unfolded. I stumbled into psychedelics, and I feel like in our modern society, people stumble into psychedelics or they don't, which is even more of a tragedy if you ask me, because if I'd never stumbled into this, where would I be today? I'd be, place I don't want to be, most likely.
Mhm. I'm so glad that you had that curiosity and that you followed your intuition and you walked through the doors that opened for you
Thank
to
you.
have that first experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what role do psychedelics play in your life today?
Yeah, I mean, my life is basically, like I said at the beginning, dedicated to psychedelics and the medicine. And I'm forever grateful that I get to study psychedelic experiences for my full-time job as a psychologist. It's also my medicine. It's, 90% of my personality. Joking. But it takes up a lot of space in my life, and graciously, and not in a way that is encumbering, but in a way that I have allowed it, and I'm so happy because of that.
Hmm, that's really lovely, Joe. And thank you so much for taking the time out of that very full life to
Mhm.
share a little bit about your first experience and how you came to the psychedelic space through that first
Okay.
experience. It was a real honor and privilege to hear from you.
Well, let me just say thank you for inviting me and listening to my story.
Yeah, a pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank
Amy.
you.